They were out early one morning, panning in the stream for gold, surrounded by the rising mountains. Old prospector with a tale for two, he brushed around in the pan, pointing out what lay within was ordinary sand. He began with his story about 20 years before, and a younger man who sought his fortune. With a tear or two he told of searching for his treasure, but making known the gold he sought was ordinary pleasure. There were years of doing without, and there were years of plenty. I started thinking that life was never steady, excepting when the bills came in and I had no money to pay. Whiskey had never tasted better ordinarily. He concluded his story as he filled the air with a laugh, saying how he found the Lord and Savior, and how he found the river of life by which his day unfolds, and pointing out what stands within is not ordinary gold, and pointing out what stands within is not ordinary gold. Trust in God, believe upon His promises. Through His word we can see His wonders, signs and miracles of His love. We can return His love with devotion, standing on His word before all men. We are His beloved and His chosen, walking in this life renewed with peace. Trust in God, believe upon His promises. promises. Through His Word, we can see His wonders, signs and miracles of His love. We can return His love with devotion, standing on His Word before all men. We are His beloved and His chosen, walking in this life renewed with peace. Trust in God, believe upon His promises. Trust in God, believe upon His promises. Believe upon His promises.
All right, God bless everybody. My name is Mark Wallace. This is True North Studio, and today our topic is the care and feeding of gratitude. The care and feeding of gratitude. All right, have you ever wanted to see more signs, miracles, and wonders than you do now? Probably. Have you ever wanted to have your physical needs supplied in a miraculous way? I'll bet. Have you ever wanted to constantly do the amazing works of Jesus Christ? Well, if you have, then you're not alone. The apostles had performed miracles when they were with Jesus, and they'd even done a few signs and wonders when they were away from Him. They were amazing people, and that's probably why He chose them in the first place. But something was a little bit off. Their results were spotty. You know, actions were inconsistent with their words, and their words were introspective. They talked about themselves. Jesus spotted a chink in their armor, and He pointed it out to them. You know, He pointed out an Achilles heel. He showed them their vulnerability, their kryptonite. And He did this to help them better themselves. And what I'm going to try to do today is to help you get to the point where you can see more signs, miracles, and wonders. And there's one big point that I'm going to share that I think it's real easy, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. So the reason for their inconsistent abundance, both spiritually and physically, stem from a problem that Jesus called a hard heart. Now, Jesus knew the cure, and it's simpler than you might imagine. As we discover the antidote for this thing Jesus called hard heart, we will uncover our ability to do more of the miraculous and notice the abundance that God's placed right in front of us. There's a real-life incident, or here's a real-life incident that happened to me, and Josephine reminded me a while back that I need to write in my gratitude journal. And it reads something like this. Well, a friend of mine who was a school teacher in a very dangerous inner city neighborhood called me one evening from the school and asked if I could come help him get his car started. He knew it would be stripped by morning if he left it in that school parking lot. And his car was maybe 19 feet long. It was one of those 1960s something boats. The car was just huge. Well, so I drove to Newark, New Jersey, and did everything I knew mechanically to get this car, get it started. But I couldn't do it. But it was getting spark, it had gas, it wasn't flooded. It was just weird. I could not start this thing. Well, as the sun dipped below the urban horizon, young men started showing up and standing at the edge of the parking lot watching us. And they inched closer a little bit at a time. and the crowd got larger and larger. But they never came all the way over to us, which I was thankful for because I was trying to get this car going. But we were really out of place in this neighborhood. Well, I tried everything. I didn't know what else to do for the car, so I just started praying out loud in this parking lot. I thanked God, and I put my hands on the giant radiator and prayed full voice for this car like I was ministering healing to a believer at a fellowship. You know, I didn't know what else to do. So I'm sure I raised a few of their eyebrows. They're going, what's this crazy guy doing? Well, my friend who was also a believer was standing right next to me, and there was nobody in the car. Nobody was in the car. And as I prayed out loud and thanked God for helping us get this car home safely, I prayed for the battery and the starter and the fuel pump and the engine and the carburetor. Anything that came to my mind, I prayed for. I was on a roll. And at that moment, the starter began whirring, started turning over. You see, all of a sudden the engine fired up. You know, and the roar of the mighty big block V8 engine, you know, just ignited, and the throttle gunned with a throaty vroom, vroom, vroom. We looked at each other, and normally that wouldn't be unusual, except that nobody was in the car. The car was empty. We were in front of the car staring at the engine. The ignition key had turned on by itself. The gas pedal was revving the engine like a teenager looking for a race at a stoplight, all by itself. There was nobody in the driver's seat. No one was in the car at all. The car just started by itself. But to me at that time, it seemed a little freaky, but it seemed right. You know, and I thought, well, I'll take it, God. And I told my friend, I don't know what just happened, but let's get the hell out of here. You know, get in there and drive like the wind. God started that car. Well, Bill hopped into that car. He took off and left me standing in the parking lot with a smile and a toolbox. But I thank God again out loud. He spun a tire in the school's weathered parking lot and headed for the New Jersey Turnpike like he was starring in a North Jersey episode of the Dukes of Hazzard. Well, I jumped in my car and followed the best I could. He drove like a bat out of hell to his house. And once he made it home and turned off his car in the driveway, it never started again. And in a miraculous fashion, I just said, thank you, God. See, miracles should not be unusual for us. You know, I don't understand why or how that happened. I've told that story before, and some people said, oh, it's just coincidence. That was just the 70s, you know, or whatever. And I said, well, I'll take coincidence all day long. I don't care what you call it. You know, God got that car started. See, but let's learn Jesus' simple lesson on how to cure a hard heart, and let's see how to care and feed our hearts so that we can once again notice the miraculous things that God wants to show us. Because I guarantee, folks, God has a lesson to teach all of us. Heart check. You may be wondering what I mean by the words heart check, or hard heart, should I say. You know, when I say hard-hearted, I don't mean a hard or uncaring person. Like if you're saying that person's hard-hearted, it means they're a jerk, right? But that's not what it meant. That's not what Jesus meant when he called the disciples hard-hearted. Okay? The apostles were great. I mean, my gosh, they were the apostles. Okay? They gave up their normal lives for the cause. They left their wives, their families, their professions to go and run with Jesus for a year. So these are good people, but he called them hard-hearted. The hard-hearted Jesus was pointing out to his apostles could be better translated as a calloused heart. And you're going to see that hard-heartedness is some residual baggage of their past lives that's affecting their now. Now again, to be callous doesn't mean heartless. We all know that we get calluses on our hands and feet because our body's protecting us from some repetitive action, right? I mean, you swing a hammer all day long, you're going to have calluses on your hands. You dance all the time. or play hockey or some sport, or you work with knives in the kitchen, you're going to get little calluses. Your fingers are going to get thicker or whatever in that point. When you run, you get calluses. You wear certain shoes, you do. It's your body protecting you because you're doing the same thing over and over and over and over, the same way. And that's really going to be the big lesson here. So, wearing a pair of shoes that don't quite fit, walking barefoot, that'll give you calluses, won't it? When I was a teen, my feet were so calloused that I once hitchhiked barefoot from Fort Worth to Austin, Texas in August in the sweltering Texas sun to go to a ZZ Top concert. And the road tar was boiling, but my calloused feet felt nothing. They were totally used to being out of shoes. You see, a calloused heart, on the other hand, or a hard heart is simply going back to our well-worn path of thinking and action. That's what a hard heart is. You just go back to your old way of thinking. And it's calloused. It's just grooved in there. You are going to put on these pair of shoes no matter what. You're going to hold that hammer this way. You're going to hold that knife, whatever it is. It's just worn in. That's a calloused heart. That's the hard heart Jesus is talking about, and I'll prove it in a few minutes here. But what I'm going to tell you is there is a better way. And just because you've always done it one way doesn't mean that is the only way. Because God doesn't always work the way that we think He should work. We want Him to. It would be easier because that's how we're calloused, right? That's what we're used to. But it's not always that way. This is the way we've always done it. It's well worn. A hard heart is repeated actions without fresh thinking. Repeated actions without fresh thinking. Now I'm going to be moving through these three Gospels at a fast clip to build this lesson. We're going to hit Mark 6, John 6, and Matthew 14. You may be able to keep up with me. You may not. Okay? These Gospel records show God's three different camera angles of the same incident, and only one absent was Luke. Luke did not record the records that we're about to share. Now, in order to grasp the lesson of reversing the effects of a hard heart, let's get a running start. Now, I'm going to point out a few tips Jesus used to help cure their old way of thinking, help cure their hard or calloused hearts. So Mark chapter 6, I'm going to read 1 through 6. And it tells, I'm not going to read it, but it tells of Jesus going back. He's early in his ministry, and he went back to his hometown of Nazareth. Okay? Now, he had just received Holy Spirit. This guy was rocking it, Jesus. I mean, he was already doing, healing people and doing miracles. And he goes back to his hometown thinking people were going to, really enjoy this, and his family would rejoice with him. But they were embarrassed of him. His family were embarrassed of him. And so here it goes. And he could there do no mighty works, save that he laid his hands upon just a few sick folk and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. That's Mark 6, 5, and 6. He marveled because of their unbelief. Now here's a tip. I'm going to give you a bunch of tips here. So some of them are good, some may not be, but I'm giving them anyway. The tip, the miraculous should be normal. He marveled at people's unbelief. The miraculous should be normal. Now verses 7 through 13 mention that Jesus sent out the 12 two by two to learn, to expect the miraculous, to watch God supply their physical needs, and to learn to avoid people who don't believe in you or your cause. That's good advice for us too. Some people aren't going to like you, folks. You speak your mind. Some people are going to try to shut you down, especially if you're telling the truth. You see, So expect miracles. Expect God will supply your need. And don't get sucked into the negatives that bring you down. My gosh, we all have it. Had it on the way driving here. Somebody gave me an Italian salute, you see. So, for no reason. They drive past on their way to church and wave to me with their middle finger. What are you going to do? Hey. Maybe they knew I was from Jersey and they think I like that stuff. I'm not from there, but I lived there. Okay, verses 14 through 29 tell us that King Herod murders John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus. Have you ever lost a family member who you were close to? I mean, it's crazy. Even if they weren't that good of a person, it's like, it hurts. Well, John is the one who is the man who prepared Israel to receive the Christ. And he was gone. He had his head cut off by somebody, by the local king. So tip, when you're in the fight, you're going to get hit. Okay? The enemy will attack others to get to you. You got to know that, folks. Because we have to know that for us. We have to know that to help protect somebody else who isn't as strong as us. Verse 30 says that after the initial shock of the death of John the Baptist, after the burial, Jesus got the apostles talking about all the miraculous things they had seen and done when they were out on their 2x2 assignment. That's from Mark 6 through 13. Now this is huge. This is right after they buried John the Baptist. Then Jesus said, okay, you guys, tell me what you learned when you were out there. Because they hadn't had a chance yet. Right after they went out 2x2, John the Baptist gets killed. What's going to be the main topic of conversation? The death, right? And what a jerk Herod is, and his stepdaughter. Okay, now here's a big tip. Jesus got the apostles talking about their miraculous, what God had done for them and through them. What has God done for you, folks? Do you remember? I know you do. So verses 31 through 34, Jesus now wanted to take his men to a secluded place. That'd be pretty normal, right? Let's take a little trip, guys. It's been too much. It's been crazy. They needed to get away. It had been crazy busy. People were just coming all the time. Now here's a tip. Sometimes we need downtime. We need to regroup and recharge at times, right? Now we all do it different ways. I do it by running. Not quickly. Okay? Some of you do it by riding a bike. Some of you do it by playing sports. Some of you do it by reading and watching TV, going for a walk. Who cares? Talking to your besties. Mark 6:31 through 33 says, and he said unto them, come ye yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they had no leisure so much as to eat. You ever been so busy you forgot to eat? That's how busy Jesus and the apostles were. They just had no time. They didn't have time to prepare a meal. You see? And they departed into a desert place by ship privately. So they got a ship. Remember, a lot of these guys were fishermen. They had ships, okay? It'd be like if you owned a trucking company. You think you'd have a truck? Okay? Help somebody move? These guys had ships. Okay? And so they got into somebody's ship and they were going to go to another part of the Galilee area that was a desert place. It means it was uninhabited. That's what desert place means, okay? And they're going to do it alone. And verse 33 says, and the people saw them departing, and many knew him and ran afoot thither out of all cities, and out went them and came together unto him. I don't know if you can even get the mind picture, but first I'll tell you a tip. Tip, always be ready to serve. You know, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Are you ready to teach? Because sometimes you're the teacher, folks. Sometimes you're the teacher. Sometimes people are going to need your attention when you just do not feel like it. You know, I want to point out speed here. Now, thousands of people watched Jesus and the apostles leave in a boat. All these people were watching, sort of like that parking lot. I don't know what they were watching me for. Maybe they're learning tips about how good I was, working on cars, which I wasn't, but these people were watching. They wanted a piece of Jesus. It'd be like if you were a famous movie star, then people start watching you, right? They start following you and they want to come over and say, hey, and call you by the wrong name. So the apostles left in this boat and the people started jogging along the shore. And this boat, they're rowing. The apostles are rowing this boat, trying to get alone, and people are right on the shore pacing them. They're just doing a little slight jog, which means they were moving about 3 miles an hour. Okay? And so they're pacing them. You see kids doing cartwheels and moms dragging their kids that didn't feel like walking anymore, and businessmen, whatever, carrying their briefcases. You see, and they're going. You see, and then Jesus and his disciples finally they decided to stop, and just deal with the crowd. Because these guys weren't leaving. The further they went, the more cities and towns they passed, the more people started gathering to where there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people. A slow run with a large mixed group, age group and people would maybe be 3 to 5 mile an hour pace. That's a 15 to 20 minute mile. Okay, that's slow. That's about how fast I run. So this was the pace of the boat being rowed by the apostles. And this can be useful information a little bit later. So try to hang on to that little tidbit. And so when they got out of the boat, the crowd had swelled to maybe 15,000 people. Jesus felt sympathy for them, even though he was the one who needed sympathy. He had just lost his cousin. He needed a break, but he had lessons to teach his men. But that was not how this day was developing. You ever had that happen? You really want a day to go a certain way, and then boop, you're off track. And sometimes that off track turns out to be better than the way you thought. See, Mark 6:34 says, and Jesus, when he came out, saw much people and was moved with compassion toward them because they were as sheep not having a shepherd. Get the mind picture? You see, and he began to teach them many things. So he gets out of that boat. These people are like, hey, Jesus, it's me. Remember me? No, but I'd like to, and then he decides, okay, I'm just going to teach him. I'm just going to share with him. I'm going to start talking. Here's a tip. Show compassion when life throws you a curve. And keep using your gift when life throws you that curve. Life will always throw curves. And now we're going to start seeing that this hard or callous heart, or this hard or callous heart that Jesus was talking about. Matthew 14 mentions that all the apostles suggest to Jesus to send the people away so these people could go into town and buy themselves some food. Now that's a logical answer. You see the sun going down, you got a huge crowd like this, they didn't bring anything with them. Okay, so it's logical that the apostles, for them to say that, wouldn't it? Hey, you guys need to go home, man. You need to go back to town. You need to go buy yourself some food. You got kids here. It's dinner time. But this was not the answer Jesus was looking for. Okay, it's logical. It makes sense. It makes all the sense in the world, but it wasn't the answer Jesus was looking for. Tip, think bigger. Expect the miraculous. See, Jesus wanted his apostles to think bigger, huge. In John 6, Jesus does a heart check. Jesus turns to the apostle Philip and asks him, and him alone, how would he handle this food situation? You ever had a boss do that to you? How do you think this should play out? Or you're on a team. What would you do now? It's the final play of the game. What would you do now? You see, it's a heart check. It's a heart check. Coach already knows what he's going to do, right? But he wants to know what you think. Are you ready for a Hail Mary? Are you ready? So 5,000 men plus their families had left home without anything to eat because they wanted to see and hear Jesus in action. These guys, they jogged along. They hollered for Jesus. Stop the boat. Hey, Jesus, hey, come over here. Please come on. They wanted him to stop and row over to him. Jesus was concerned about all these people having something to eat after he talked for a little bit. But the lesson is bigger than just feeding them. This next section has some words that are super important to this lesson. And it's about reversing the effect of a hard heart, or reversing the effect of calloused heart, or a heart that is just used to doing things one way. And if you're reading this, here I'm going to capitalize words that I want to emphasize. Okay, they're not like that in the text. Okay, if you're listening, it doesn't make any difference. Okay. And John chapter 6, verse 5 through 9, when Jesus then lifted up his eyes, he saw a great company come unto him. And he said unto Philip, when shall we buy bread, that these may eat? And he said this to prove him, or to test him. Jesus said, for he himself knew what he would do. Now, Jesus already had the rest of this day mapped out in his head. God had already showed him, but he didn't tell the apostles. And you'll see, this is going to blow your mind in a minute. Jesus himself knew exactly what he was going to do that day, and he knew his plan. And we're going to see that it was quite a complex plan with a lot of moving parts. Verse 7, Philip answered him, 200 pennies worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. Now, 200 pennies worth it's not $2, okay? 200 pennies worth of money was the amount that a minimum wage worker earns in a year. So that's how much the apostles had on hand. Okay? Sounds like a lot of money, but it's not all that much money if you're living off of that money. And he said, 200 pennies worth, Jesus, it ain't going to feed this crowd. The expositor's Greek Testament says that 200 pennies worth is enough to feed 2,000 people one meal. Okay, there was about 15,000 people there. So there wasn't nearly enough money to feed the crowd. Now, why Jesus singled out Philip, I don't know. Maybe they all heard what Jesus asked. I don't know. Maybe Philip had told stories when they were talking about how God had supplied their need for food when he was out 2 by 2, which I think is probably more likely the case. Okay, Philip, big shot. How would you handle this? You've already seen God work in you and supply your need. What would you do right now, Philip? Hey, Phil, come on. What do you think? And, remember, they'd all been on that 2 by 2 junior apostle training program a few days before all this stuff happened. Okay, remember he got them talking after they buried John. So here's a tip. Jesus gets them talking through possible solutions. He wants them to recognize how God had already worked in them. This is a big point. You have to talk about your victories. You have to talk about the miracles that God's happened. Verse 8, one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, saith unto him. Now this guy must have been eavesdropping. There's a lad here which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. But what are they amongst so many? Andrew is so close to the answer, Jesus could taste it. He mentions a young man with 5 loaves and 2 small fish. Like Philip, Andrew goes back to his old way of thinking before he recognizes God's answer. You see, that's a hard heart, folks. It's a heart that's callous to do things just one way and only one way. We can't hear the entire still small voice, the message. When you can't, then you have a calloused heart. Or when you hear it and decide to keep doing things your old way, that's a calloused heart. That's a hard heart. We've all had that happen. We know we should do this, but we just keep doing it the old way. Because it feels good. We're used to it. It's easy. See, Philip and Andrew sputtered. Andrew almost had it. Hey, there's one kid. He must have gone through the crowd or yelled out, hey, anybody got any food? Who brought food? One kid in all those maybe 15,000 people had brought food. 5 loaves and 2 small fish. Now, Philip and Andrew thought like most people, like I said earlier. It's not bad. It's not bad. It's not enough money, you know. That food is not enough. It's not enough, not enough. So they were talking lack. It's pretty normal talk, okay? It's not right, though. It's not miraculous. You see, not bad, but not miraculous. Jesus knew exactly what he was going to do. Remember, it said that he already knew what he was going to do. We read that earlier. So here's a tip. Be ready for change. Be ready for God. Are you ready? So Philip and Andrew eventually, and all the apostles told Jesus that he needed to cut the people loose so they could go back home and care for themselves and their families. Logical. Logical. You know, here's some things. If you ever hear yourself saying these things, this could be an indicator. Remember, your words are the dashboard of your heart. Your words are the dashboard. They're the warning light, so to speak. They're the indicators, you know, of your believing system. So, like the words "I want" means you're really saying "I lack." "I wish" is another way of saying I'm not in control. "I can't" is self-explanatory. "I'm trying" implies you lack commitment. "I hope," in today's terms, implies it might happen or it might not, which shows lack of believing. "I should" implies you really don't want to. "Oh yeah, I really should do that, boss." What you're really saying is, I have no intention of doing that, boss. You see, when you hear those things, you know, "I wish," "I can't," you know, I hope, you know, those are just words that make other people turn off and make you turn off. They turn off your miracles. If you hear yourself repeatedly asking God for the same thing in the same way in your prayers with any of the above words, it could be an indicator that something is amiss. If you keep praying for the same thing over and over and over and you're not getting answers, probably it's due to a hard or calloused heart. Tip: be sure that your language lines up with the Word, or be sure that your language lines up with the miraculous. This is good for prayers too. If you're going to pray, you might as well pray for miracles, right? I mean, why not? We already got enough average, don't we? We already got enough. It's okay. You see, repeatedly remembering the good, the better, and the best are the cure for a hard heart or a calloused heart. Now, I want to remind you that in John 6:6, Jesus already knew how he was going to handle things. And I think Jesus had the entire next 24 hours mapped out in his head and heart. The crowd was unprepared physically. The apostles were unprepared spiritually, but Jesus was ready for anything. He wanted to see how his trainees would handle the situation. This is a heart check. And I'm telling you, God gives you heart checks too, to see where we're at. He's not testing you to see how bad you're going to do. It's because if we have those heart checks, maybe we can do better. Maybe we can do the miraculous instead of the average. Mark 6:36 and 37 tells us that Jesus had challenged Philip and the apostles to think of a way to feed the crowd. They made excuses and thought with their heads and not their hearts. Send them away, every man for himself. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough food for everybody. Well, wasn't this a lesson they learned a little while ago when they're out 2 by 2? I mean, they had to believe Jesus sent them out with no money and no extra clothes. They had to find food. They had to believe God for food, shelter, clothing. I mean, they had to believe God for everything. Plus, they cast out spirits. They did healings. I mean, so they had to believe for miracles too. They were on their own. 2 by 2. They just learned this stuff. They just learned that God will supply your physical needs if you'll just allow Him. They just learned this. So, a side note. Travelers usually carried a little food with them, but this group must have left their homes and businesses so quickly they left empty-handed. Nobody at that day and time would leave empty-handed. Just like you might, if you're traveling into a snowstorm, don't you pack extra stuff just in case? Most people do, right? I mean, if you're going on a long trip across, if you're going to be gone all day, you might take some extra water, right? You might take a snack bar or something, you see? So typically people carried a small woven bag or basket about the size of a small backpack. Everybody had one. And it would hold about 2 gallons worth of food and supplies. Now it's similar in size to those thin plastic shopping bags that they give you. They put your items in at checkout. They hold exactly 2 gallons. I measured them. I tried. I put 2 gallons of water in one. They're 2-gallon bags. And that's the exact size that the people in the first century, that's the bags that they carried. That was their lunch bag. That was their everyday carry bag. A woman, that was their purse. You know, that was their bag. And each of the apostles would have had one of these in the boat. This is another important point. Okay? And we'll get to this in just a second. So everybody had these little bags. They hold about 2 gallons worth of food. Now, out of all those people, the apostles found one person, one kid who had brought his food. His mom had packed him a lunch with 5 loaves of flat bread and 2 small fishes. Now, 2 loaves for a growing boy, and this is why she did it. She gave him 2 loaves for him. A growing boy would eat 2 loaves, okay? And then she gave him 3 loaves to share with somebody else. And the Easternism, the Orientalism, the custom of the day was, is you always give a guest 3. You always give abundance. Most people can't eat 3 of these flat loaves of bread, okay? And so you always give 3. So his mom packed him enough for him and for a friend. I thought that was cute. 1 fish for him, 1 fish for his friend. That's just the way it was. Now, because you always give a stranger 3 loaves, like I just said. His mom gave him abundance to share. Now, little did she know that his food would feed maybe 15,000 people, and that he'd make maybe 15,000 new friends. You know, in Mark 6:40, Jesus asked a large crowd to sit in the green grass in manageable groups of 50 or 100. In Mark 6:31 and John 6:11, it says that Jesus gave thanks. He expressed gratitude to God for what he was about to supply. Remember, Jesus already had a pretty good idea what was going to happen. He then divided the food up to each of the 12 apostles, who probably carried it around in their little woven 2-gallon basket or bag. All the apostles had one. Now, tip. If you know it's revelation from God, then take action. Matthew 14, 17 and 21 says, Jesus and the disciples, they fed 5,000 families with 5 loaves and 2 small fish. That's about 10 to 15,000 people. As fast as they could pull it out of their little bag, more would appear. Out of their little go bags, okay? Out of their bag. I mean, it probably just blew their minds. It's like, what? What? You know, and they kept giving more and more. People, I want seconds, I want thirds. And they just kept handing this out, these 12 apostles. Now, that's a lot of people to hand stuff out to. They might have just been tossing it like Frisbees. You know, they're little flat, round loaves right about the size of a plate. As fast as they could throw them, these guys were catching them and more was appearing. You see, so I think it's pretty cool. Until everyone was fed and their bags were empty. At one point, it emptied up and everybody was stuffed. John 6:12 through 13 says, when they were filled, When they were filled, he said unto his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, that there be nothing lost. Therefore they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which remained over and above to them that had eaten. It doesn't say there was fish left over, but it says, so where do you think they got the 12 bags? You think it might have been their little empty backpacks that were on the boat? They went back to the boat, retrieved their little bag, right? And now they're going around, or they already had these things because they were passing it out, and now they picked up the scraps. So they had people, okay, what's left over? Give me leftover. And so now all the apostles has their own little bag full of bread. This is important. Okay, now the 12 baskets of leftovers in this record are those small, like I said, 2-gallon grocery store sized bags. They're woven backpacks. And think of shopping. I just want you to get the mind picture. So it wasn't like huge baskets like you see in the Jesus pictures, okay, where they had 12 big baskets. They were just little, and you can look it up for yourself. It's just little small baskets. It's just day bags. That's all it was. And now, when you go shopping, I bet you come home with 10 or 12 of those little bags full of food, don't you, in your trunk? I mean, when my wife does, it's about 10 or 12, right? 10, 15 bags in there, depending on how big of a shopping she does, okay? If you're shopping for family, you're going to bring that many home, right? So there's 12 bags. That's about how much food they had, what you'd put in the back of a minivan, okay? And these 12 baskets, you know, were probably the apostles' very own lunch backpacks that, you know, because nobody else brought theirs. So their baskets, the reason theirs are empty because Jesus hurried those guys out that morning too, okay? That's why the apostles didn't have anything. You think, oh, they must have had everything prepared and all that. Yeah, they're just people, okay? Jesus wanted to get the heck out of there. He knew God was going to supply, but he had this whole lesson mapped out in his head. And we're going to get to something cool in a minute. I keep telling you that. Okay, now so there's 12 small baskets the size of a bag you get at checkout. Okay, leftovers from 15,000 people or so, and 12 Walmart-sized bags of leftovers. And this would have been 1 or 2 days' food for each of the apostles. They were going to need it. Now, tip. God knows your needs before you do, and he's going to supply them if you want him to. Okay? He knows your need, and he will supply. All in all, it was an amazing day so far. I mean, to me, that would be my day. That'd be my best day of my life if I saw that, okay? But it's just getting started. The big lesson hadn't even been learned yet, okay? They just fed all these 5,000 men plus their wives and children with one kid's sack lunch, okay? And they came away with 12 baskets full, 12 of their little bags full, long enough for a long night's work. And the lesson of gratitude is just getting started. Now we're going to hit the second lesson, the big lesson of the day. And just when they thought things were going to calm down, Jesus picks up the pace. Remember John 6:6, where Jesus said he already knew what he was going to do? I keep saying this because it's important. Matthew 14:23 says, evening came and Jesus sent the disciples away in a boat. And see, they didn't really want to leave him, but he constrained them. He pleaded with them to leave. Remember, he had this plan in his head. Tip, if God shows you a plan, stick to his plan. John 6:14 and 15. And it says that Jesus perceived that the people he had just fed would take him by force and try to make him king. So he sent the people home. These people he just fed were going to force him to be king. I mean, so they were starting to come in closer and gather and get around him. He said, you guys go home. Just get out of here. You know, I need to be alone. And he convinced them and they left. Finally, okay? Now that's sort of scary if somebody tries to make you be something you don't want to be. So tip, don't let pride and ego stop you from your calling. He could have gone, oh, they think I'm king. Hey, man, that's cool, man. I'm the king. I'm the greatest. You know, it looks cool on TV, right? We like athletes that act like that, but that's not how Jesus was. Matthew 14:23. Jesus then went up on a hill to pray. and to watch the apostles row out to a designated spot on the lake. And he had told them to row out to the middle and stay there until he showed up. And you're going to see what I'm talking about in a minute. They stayed in a holding pattern. 2 or 3 or 4 miles out, John 6. And this Sea of Galilee is actually a lake. And it's only about 141 feet deep, or 43 meters deep. It's not very deep. That's at its deepest. And so they may have anchored out there. Because I always wondered, why would these apostles, why would they have just rowed out? These are fishermen why would they stay out there on this lake all night? Okay? They could row across it slowly in 2 hours. Okay? It wasn't that big. It was 8 miles across and 11 miles long. That's it. Not that big. And Mark 6:48 and John 6 both say that Jesus from the hilltop saw them toiling in rowing because of high winds. So the winds kicked up. And now they're trying to keep this boat in place. I always thought, well, if they were in danger, wouldn't they just let the wind drift them back to shore? Wouldn't they? I mean, that would be the smart thing, right? If they were in danger. They weren't really in danger. These were fishermen. The wind kicked up and they were trying to do what Jesus said. Jesus said, go over here. Wait out there. And so they're waiting out in the middle of this lake, you see, and high winds made them row madly to stay out there where Jesus told them to. They knew where the middle was, you could tell. You could see lights on both sides, right? They knew where the middle was. They're from that area. All the apostles, except for Judas, was from Galilee, you see. And by the way, you can see 3 or 4 miles if you're on a hill. You can. You know, plus all fishing boats would have a fisherman's lantern with them at night, so he could track that boat. Now, tip, when you pray, watch for God's perfect timing. Now, have you ever wondered why, like I said, why trained fishermen who grew up on the lake would have stayed out in the middle of a small lake all night, especially during a windstorm? Well, these guys did because Jesus told them to. Matthew 14:25 says it was the 4th watch of the night, which means it's between 3 and 6 a.m. They've been out in the middle of the lake for maybe 6 hours and out on the water for up to at least, they're probably out there for between 6 and 8 hours. It doesn't take that long to cross that lake. You could walk around the whole lake in 6 hours, less than 6 hours. It's like a 21-mile circumference or something. You see? So they're out there for 6 to 8 hours, and Jesus had made sure they each had their individual lunch bags with them in case they got hungry. So Jesus took care of those kids. God did. I thought it was sort of cool. It was all part of the Master's plan. Now, if they had rowed at a slow walking pace, which is about 3 miles an hour, 20-minute miles, they could cross that lake in 2.5 hours. So why did they stay in the middle all night? Watch this. John 6:17, and entered into a ship and went over the sea toward Capernaum. And it was now dark, and Jesus was not yet come to them. Okay, right there. Now I about lost my mind when I read that line. Jesus was not yet come to them. Which means, and that word not, it says not come to them, it means it's translated not yet, okay? So a tip here is the answer is coming. Be ready. The apostles have been waiting for Jesus in the middle of the lake. They've been waiting for him. He had told them he would come to them. It was his plan. They knew that if Jesus said he would meet them in the middle of the lake, that he would meet them in the middle of the lake. Jesus wasn't a liar. They didn't know how he would get out there to them, and they didn't ask him. So they waited and waited for 7 to 10 hours maybe, which is a fisherman's night shift. They were used to working all night. Maybe they even cast a rod, a little bit. So that's why Jesus chose to sit atop that hill, okay, to keep an eye on the boys, when while he was praying. So he was up there, praying and looking and praying and looking, and he was wondering what these guys were, he was making sure they're okay. He saw the wind pick up, And then he saw him rowing madly, or saw the boat maybe moving around, you see. And now was the perfect moment. So here's a tip. There's always a perfect moment. And the wind kicked up on the shallow lake, and they had to work hard to keep the boat where Jesus told them to hang out and wait for him. Now, Mark 6:48, and when he saw them toiling and rowing, for the wind was contrary to them, it was hard to stay in that place, and about the fourth watch of the night, he cometh unto them walking upon the sea, and would have passed them. He's not in a boat like they would have assumed. He's walking on the water. Tip, God may supply your need in ways you never expected. Now, Jesus is one cool dude. It was between 3 and 6 a.m. He'd been waiting all night for the right time to spring this surprise on them. He knew what he was going to do. He knew what he was going to do, but he didn't tell his guys. Now, I would have trouble not giving my friends a hint. Hey, wait till you see what I'm going to do tonight, dude. About the fourth watch of the night, he cometh unto them walking upon the sea, and would have passed by them. Now, most people miss this. And would have passed by them. Now, Jesus even messes with the boys a little bit. Remember, these guys were friends. They farted around the fire together and laughed. They were just regular guys, okay? They're about 30 years old, all of them, okay? And they were used to some of them had fished together their whole lives. 4 of them were fishermen, okay? All of them were from Galilee except for one. And so now Jesus had walked on the water 3 to 4 miles if he walked that whole way. Now that would have taken him over an hour, which means he had to leave before the 3rd watch of the night or 4th watch of the night, okay? His timing's impeccable, okay? And he also acted, and I love how it says he acted, he acted like he was going to pass him by. He was just taking a casual stroll. And then he acted like he was walking right past the boat. Here these guys are like rowing like mad, and Jesus is walking up and down on the waves, and they don't notice him for a second. And all of a sudden he's walking in front of the boat, and acting like he's just going to keep walking across the lake. I bet he took great pleasure in acting like he was going to pass them. I would have. If I had a thought of something like that, that would be so funny. Could you see Jesus whistling, trying to hold back a smile as he was going to walk right past the apostles in that boat? Psych! Mind you, it was very windy, so Jesus would have been soaking wet, his hair and beard dripping, his toga dripping and flapping in the breeze. It was springtime. And he was walking up and down those waves for a while. Jesus knew they would react. He was looking for a heart reaction. And did he get one? Oh, yeah. Yeah. He told them he was going to meet them in the middle, but he didn't tell them how he was going to get there. Mark 6:49 through 50, but when they had saw him walking upon the sea, they supposed it had been a spirit, and they cried out. For they all saw him and were troubled. And immediately he talked with them and said unto them, be of good cheer. Hey, it's me. Be not afraid. Tip, if God told you that you could do it, don't be afraid. Now they freaked, okay? They weren't expecting this. Here's another tip. Expect the unexpected. See, they freaked. They thought at first that Jesus was a devil spirit. And they all screamed like school children who snuck into a haunted house. That's a funny mind picture, for lake-hardened fishermen. Seeing these grown men crying out like that. But it'd be freaky, right? And they'd recently dealt with and cast out devil spirits a few short days before. They probably saw some crazy people, when they're on their self-study 2x2 junior apostle training program. Now they thought Jesus was a devil spirit. Oh, the humanity. Now, they'd been expecting Jesus to meet them in this very spot, but they had no idea how he was going to get there. They had no idea he was going to walk on the water. Tip, the answer to your prayers may come in unusual ways. Jesus knew how this was going to play out. way back before he spoke with Philip, before the feeding of the 5,000 men and their families earlier that day, before he stepped foot on water. Matthew 14, 28 through 31, and Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. Now you got to love Peter. Now Peter's showing some heart. He's showing some balls. Okay? He isn't quite sure about this walking on water thing, but he's willing to give it a try. You got to hand it to him. Verse 29 of Matthew 14. And Jesus said, come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Peter just walked on the water. He focused his mind on Jesus and he walked on the water. Imagine how he felt. How would you feel? He'd been raised on the lake. You know, he knew every inch of it. But he'd always done it from the safety of a boat. Okay? It's different. Now he's walking on the water. Tip, you can do more than you think you can. You have to believe that if you're gonna see the miraculous. Matthew 14:30. But when Peter, saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me! And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore or in what didst thou doubt? And doubt means to think twice or to double think it. Peter, you were thinking so good. Why did you allow your mind to go back to your old, calloused, worn, well-grooved way of thinking? What distracted you from the miraculous? You were doing it. This term little faith, this doubt, this mental overlap is the telltale sign of a hard heart. Remember, a hard heart doesn't mean that they were mean people. You know, it just means that they were stuck. They were stuck in an old groove of thinking. We all have them. Tip, focus on what you want, not on what you don't want. You know, John 6:21, then they willingly received him into the ship, and immediately the ship was at land, whither they went. Mark 6:51 and 52, and he went up unto them into the ship, and the wind ceased, and they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure, and wondered, for they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. Mark and John together tells us that this happened as soon as Jesus got into the boat. The wind stopped, and the boat immediately appeared on the shore of their intended destination, and they freaked out. Now, it went at least 2 miles in an instant. They were in the middle, now they're on the shore, and they're like, you know, they're trying to figure out, they ain't getting it, you know, they got their hankies out, you know, they're trying to figure out what the heck just happened. Okay, I mean, that's a lot to take in, isn't it? You see, they flipped. Okay, so now there's no more wind, and they're on the shore. Okay, and I like the words, you know, those are our words again, hardened heart. And that means calloused again. They've been out all night. Jesus walked to them on the water. Peter walked on the water. Peter needs help not sinking and getting back into the boat. Jesus climbs aboard, and immediately the wind stops, and the boat is transported to shore in a split second. The word amazed means they went a little bit insane. The word beyond measure means super abundantly insane, and they were not just a little insane, they went full on bonkers, these guys. You know, the word wondered means, now I like that, the word wondered means that they admired it. They go, this flipped me out, but gotta respect the dude. Gotta respect Jesus. You ever seen something, you didn't get it, but it's like, I gotta hand it to that guy. I remember as a teen, I was standing in front of a pool hall, and my long red hair baking in the hot Texas sun, and all of a sudden this blue Chevy moving maybe 50 miles an hour, the guy decided he too wanted to go to the pool hall, but he decided too late, and he turned the wheel at 50, and the car started just just donutting out of control, and it jumped the curb, went into this parking lot. And I was standing there with a friend, and I thought, this is going to be good. Something's about to happen. I was protected by a couple of lines of cars. Well, there was this thing's heading for this line of parked cars. It's spinning and screeching and squealing. And we couldn't stop looking. And we couldn't move because it was too good. You know, we were transfixed. And the Chevy spinning totally out of control across this small parking lot came to a stop, face first, perfectly in the only parking space that was in front of that building. And just stopped. Just like a regular parked car. The kid got out of the car, shut it, locked it with his key, and walked past us, not even looking at us, and walked right in to go play pool. He calmly, you know, I mean, it was like, you know, I was like, what? The driver never looked at us, and he walked into this pool hall. We were dumbfounded. I was amazed. I was frozen. I was shocked. But somehow I admired that kid. I know how these guys felt, okay? And the reason they momentarily lost their minds and couldn't handle the miracles that were stacking up was because they had what Jesus called a hard heart. So in verse 52, they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. See, the reason these amazing apostles maintained hard hearts and kept coming up short was because they simply forgot to remember the miracle of the loaves and the fishes that they had just participated in. So a tip, remember the amazing things God's already done for you and you've done for Him. So really, in closing this thing out, if you too want to see the miracles that you haven't seen in a while, you know, or you want to see some for the first time, you got to remember what God's already done. Now, Moses taught people to talk about it, to write it down all day long. When they got up, when they went to bed, to remember the amazing things of God all day long. David wrote it and sang it. So David sang it out. You know, today, we write it in journals, or we post it on Facebook, or we do a text. Or, you know, we still do it. But you do this all the time, all the time, all the time. Talk about what God has done for you. And if you'll do that, you will cure hard-heartedness. You will cure calloused heart. You see, and you'll begin to see the miracles that you deserve to see, folks. That's the way it's designed to be. So if you want to see the miraculous, then remember the miracles that God's already done for you. And that is the care and feeding of gratitude. God bless you all.